On the border of a medieval empire, a giant city of heavy industry and steel suddenly appeared. Here, the guards not only patrol with AK-47s, but rumbling steam trains run everywhere. All because I transmigrated to become the useless prince of the Thorn Kingdom who failed in the succession struggle and was exiled to a land of extreme cold and death. Relying on an awakened technology system, I made cement by hand to build factories, and taking a few old, weak, sick, and disabled people, I forcibly ignited the modern technology tree. Taking exactly 10 years, I finally developed this barren wasteland into a paradise on Earth through a dimensional strike. The territory's commoners not only have white bread and roast meat for every meal, but even 3-year-old children lick white sugar, an exclusive luxury of noblices a snack. Just as I built Maxim heavy machine guns and 155mm howitzers, preparing to give the cold weapon era a little modern industrial shock, my royal uncle, King Charles III, who swept me out of the house back then, suddenly brought his Minister of Finance to my territory for an incognito inspection. At this moment, in a carriage on the extreme northern frontier of the Thorn Kingdom, the Minister of Finance, Bart, spoke to Charles III beside him. "Your Majesty, must we really keep going forward?" Bart's teeth chattered, his voice broken by the wind. "Ahead is Blackstone City. That is the kingdom's most barren mud pit. Besides bandits, wild beasts, and that exiled trash, His Highness Silas, not even a single edible blade of grass can grow there. We are conducting an incognito inspection of northern military affairs. There is no need to visit a deadland like that." Charles III pulled the reins, exhaled a puff of white breath, and gazed deeply into the distance. "Bart, Silas is, after all, my blood nephew. 10 years ago, when his father failed to seize the throne, I spared his life and granted him this Blackstone City. For these 10 years, the royal capital hasn't received a single tax coin or report from Blackstone City. Some say he was eaten by wild wolves long ago, others say he became a bandit chief. Since I have come to the north, I must at least take a look." "Take a look? Your Majesty, you are simply too merciful." Bart curled his lips in disdain. "For that kind of trash, dying in the wilderness is his best ending. Have you forgotten that when he left the royal capital, he didn't even take an iron sword, taking only a few old and disabled servants? 10 years have passed. Blackstone City has probably turned into a ghost town long ago." Charles III did not reply. He actually didn't hold any hope in his heart either. The land of Blackstone City was barren, enduring 5 months of bitter winter a year. It had no city walls and no army. How could a destitute prince without the strength to truss a chicken survive? "Let's keep moving. If we can't find a village before dark, well, make camp behind a leeward mound." Charles III cracked his horsewhip. The two continued onward. However, when they crested a low, barren hill, the sight before them made Charles III pull tightly on his reins. His old horse let out a whinny, its front hooves rearing high. "What is this?" Charles III's eyes widened, his voice carrying unconcealable shock. Beneath their feet, the wilderness that should have been filled with mud, gravel, and thorns had vanished. In its place was a straight, wide, and unbelievably flat grayish-white avenue. This avenue was a full 10 meters wide. Its surface didn't have even a single trace of wheel ruts, as hard as if it were polished from a single massive boulder. Like a grayish-white sharp sword, it directly cleaved through the barren plains, extending all the way to the edge of sight. Bart was also dumbfounded. He tumbled off his horse, dropping to his knees with a thud, and used his chubby hands to fiercely pound the road surface. Bang, bang, a muffled sound echoed. Bart's palms turned red from the impact, but the road surface didn't have a single scratch. "Stone? No, it's not stone. There are no splicing seams. It's simply as if the gods paved it with a single, colossal grayish-white rock." Bart looked up in terror. "Your Majesty, this is witchcraft. Absolutely the witchcraft of devils. How could Blackstone City have such a thing?" Charles III took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the shock in his heart. As the monarch of a nation, he had seen the most prosperous flagstone roads of the royal capital, which took tens of thousands of slaves and 3 years to pave. But even the royal avenue was bumpy and full of muddy water on rainy days. Yet this road before his eyes was so clean and flat that it made one doubt their own eyes. If this is witchcraft, the devil casting, it must be an extremely wealthy madman. Charles III dismounted and stepped onto the hard road, feeling the solidness transmitted from the soles of his feet. Just then, a strange rumbling sound suddenly came from the distance. Rumble, rumble. The sound approached from afar, and the ground began to tremble slightly. Bart screamed in terror and hid behind Charles III. "Your Majesty, a monster. It must be a giant beast of the wilderness." Charles III also instinctively gripped the long sword at his waist, staring dead set at the end of the avenue. They saw a behemoth rushing madly down the grayish-white avenue at an astonishing speed. It was a square box made of steel, with 4 black, round wheels growing underneath it. It had no horses pulling it, no sails, yet it ran faster than the kingdom's most elite light cavalry. The front of the steel box even shone with 2 piercingly bright lights, looking exactly like the eyes of a giant beast. "Protect the king." Bart closed his eyes in in fright. However, that steel behemoth did not crash into them. Accompanied by an ear-piercing screech of friction, the behemoth came to a steady halt a dozen meters away. Immediately after, a door popped open on the side of the steel box, and a short-haired young man wearing strange, tight-fitting black clothes jumped down. The young man looked at Charles III and Bart, then at their two scrawny horses, frowning slightly, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. "Hey, outsiders, animal-drawn carts and horses are forbidden on Blackstone City's National Highway number 1. Didn't you read the road signs? Hurry up and lead your horses off. If they shit and ruin the road surface, you'll be fined 50 silver coins." Charles III was stunned. He, the dignified monarch of a nation, was actually being pointed at and lectured by a commoner? Also, what was National Highway number 1? What was a fine of 50 silver coins? What made his blood run even colder was, what in the world was the steel behemoth behind this young man? Audacious! How dare you use such a tone towards Bart jumped out from behind Charles III, just about to put on the airs of a kingdom's minister, but was pressed down by Charles III. Charles III stared intently at the young man, especially at the strangely textured, extremely form-fitting black fabric he wore, as well as the four-wheeled steel carriage behind him that was still emitting a low rumble. "Young man," Charles III lowered his voice, trying to make his tone seem peaceful. "We are traveling merchants from the south and lost our way in the wilderness. We didn't know this was the territory of Blackstone City. Please forgive our offense. May I ask, what is this steel object behind you that can run on its own without horses?" The young man looked them up and down. Seeing that although they looked destitute, the material of the clothes under their cloaks was decent, he put away some of his hostility and sneered. "Traveling merchants? No wonder you haven't seen the world. This is called an off-road vehicle, a mechanical engineering vehicle invented by our Lord. It runs on diesel, understand? Forget it, talking to you southern country bumpkins about diesel is useless." The young man waved his hand, stepped forward, and pointed to an iron sign standing by the road. "See that? Traffic rules. On this cement road, horses can only walk on the auxiliary road to the side." "Cement road?" Charles III chewed on this unfamiliar term. "It's a stone road made by mixing water and mud, a miracle bestowed by the Lord." The young man looked proud. "Alright, you look like you're freezing. Follow the auxiliary road forward for 5 miles. There's a service area rest stop. You can rest there for the night and enter the city tomorrow. Remember, don't let your horses shit on the main road." After saying that, the young man got into the off-road vehicle and slammed the door shut with a bang. With a deafening roar, the off-road vehicle expelled a puff of faint blue smoke and shot out like an arrow from a bow, disappearing at the end of the road in the blink of an eye. The cold wind blew past. Charles III and Bart stood dumbfounded on the spot, unable to recover their senses for a long time. "Your Majesty, that thing, that iron shell, there's absolutely a demon hiding inside." The fat all over Bart's body was trembling. "Running without horses, and at such a speed, what is this if not the power of a demon? His Highness Silas must have sold his soul to the devil." "Shut up, Bart." Charles III's voice was unusually cold, but only he knew that the palm gripping his sword was covered in cold sweat. If that was the power of a demon, why did that commoner dare to drive it so casually? And judging from the young man's tone, this thing didn't seem to be a rarity in Blackstone City. "Let's go to that service area rest stop." Charles III led his horse and walked along the dirt auxiliary road beside the cement road. 5 miles wasn't far. As night began to fall and the wind on the wilderness became even more biting, a building radiating warm light appeared in their field of vision. It was a 2-story house, but strangely, it wasn't built of wood or stone, but neatly stacked red blocks, the surface coated with white ash. What made Charles III find it most inconceivable was that the house's windows weren't pasted with parchment or rags, but inlaid with pieces of thin flakes as transparent as ice crystals. The light inside the house shone through those transparent flakes, acting like a lighthouse in the pitch-black wilderness. "Glass! Heavens, such massive panes of colorless glass!" Bart exclaimed, his eyeballs about to pop out. In the Thorn Kingdom, colorless glass was an extremely luxurious treasure. Only the royal family and top-tier grand nobles were worthy of possessing a palm-sized piece, usually used to make wine goblets. Yet here, they actually used such huge pieces of glass to make windows. Filled with awe and apprehension, the two pushed open the wooden door of the rest stop. A wave of heat rushed at their faces, instantly dispelling the chill from their bodies. The rest stop's lobby was very bright, but the light source wasn't torches or candles. Instead, it was glass spheres hanging from the ceiling, emitting a steady and piercing white light. "Welcome to the Highway 1 rest stop. Will you two be staying the night or eating?" Behind the counter, a plump auntie wearing a clean blue uniform greeted them warmly. Charles III looked around. There were a few tables in the lobby. Several people wearing coarse cloth clothes, looking like craftsmen or farmers, were taking big bites of food. On the plates in front of them was actually white bread and a large chunk of roasted meat dripping with fat. Commoners eating white bread, eating meat? Charles III felt his worldview undergoing a violent impact. Everywhere else in the kingdom, commoners could only eat black bread mixed with sawdust and sand. Meat was food exclusive to nobles. 2 guest rooms and some hot food. Charles III pretended to be calm, fished out a gold coin from his coat, and tossed it on the counter. The plump auntie picked up the gold coin, looked at it, and curled her lip. Southern gold coins? The purity is really poor. Consider yourselves lucky. We barely accept foreign currency here. Here is your change. Take it. The auntie handed over a handful of colorful pieces of paper and a few exquisite silver coins. What is this? Charles III frowned at the paper in his hand. Blackstone currency, of course. The legal tender of our territory. You outsiders are just troublesome. The auntie rolled her eyes. The rooms are on the 2nd floor. Turn left, 201 and 202. The rooms have heating and independent bathrooms. There's plenty of hot water, just don't splash water everywhere. Dizzy, Charles III and Bart went up to the 2nd floor. When they pushed open the door to the guest room, they were shocked once again. The room wasn't large, but it was spotlessly clean. By the wall was a white iron lump radiator radiating astonishing heat, which was the reason the room was as warm as spring. Bart curiously walked into the small room called the independent bathroom. A moment later, a pig-slaughtering scream came from inside. Your Majesty, save me, there's a water monster. Charles III drew his sword and rushed in, only to see Bart pointing at a metal pipe on the wall. Above the metal pipe was a handle. Bart had accidentally bumped the handle just now, and clear hot water was continuously spewing out from the pipe. Where did this water come from? Charles III reached out and touched it. The water was scalding hot. No servants boiling water, no wooden buckets. The water just flowed out of the wall out of thin air. He looked up and saw a pristine white ceramic toilet beside it, as well as a note pasted on the wall. Please press the flush button after use. Charles III, the supreme king of the Thorn Kingdom, currently standing in the toilet of a small rest stop on the edge of Blackstone City, felt an unprecedented fear. This was a deep fear born from facing the unknown, facing a civilization that completely exceeded his realm of comprehension. Silas, just what have you been doing here for these past 10 years? That night, Charles III stayed awake all night. He lay under a soft cotton quilt that smelled of being sun-dried, listening to the occasional sound of flowing water in the walls, his mind constantly replaying everything he had seen today. The indestructible cement road, the off-road vehicle with astonishing speed, the electric lights as bright as day, the endless supply of hot water. Taking any single one of these things back to the royal capital would be enough to cause the entire upper-class society to go crazy. Yet here, they seemed to be merely daily necessities for the commoners. The next morning, Charles III walked out of his room with dark circles under his eyes. Bart followed behind, looking lethargic. Last night, Bart had spent half the night studying that flush toilet, ultimately firmly believing it was a magic circle leading to the sea god's palace. The two ate a breakfast on the 1st floor that nearly made them swallow their tongues, fried eggs, bacon, and a drink called milk, then led their horses out of the rest stop. You two, just follow the main road to enter the city. But there's a heavy convoy passing through today. You'd better stay to the side. The rest stop, Auntie kindly reminded them. Charles III thanked her, and the two continued north along the dirt road. As they got closer and closer to Blackstone City, the pedestrians on the road gradually increased. There were young people speeding by on strange 2-wheeled iron frames bicycles, and merchants driving 4-wheeled horse carriages fully loaded with goods. Everyone's face beamed with a kind of radiance that Charles III had never seen on the faces of the commoners in the royal capital, confident, energetic, with no fear of nobles, only hope for life. Suddenly, an earth-shattering, drawn-out steam whistle sounded from the distant wilderness, like a roaring ancient behemoth. Bart was so scared he shuddered all over, nearly falling off his horse. Your Majesty, what monster is it this time? Charles III pulled his reins and looked towards the sound. About 2 kilometers away from the cement road, there was a strange path paved with 2 parallel strips of steel. At this moment, on that path of steel, a behemoth belching heavy black smoke was roaring toward them. It was a black steam train. It was 100 times more massive than the off-road vehicle they saw yesterday. The huge steel wheels scraped madly against the iron rails, producing a deafening clatter-clank sound. Behind the locomotive, it dragged dozens of long carriages piled high with black ore and massive timber. The trembling of the earth was even more violent than yesterday. Charles III could even feel his heart beating rhythmically with that clatter-clank sound. Bart's legs gave out, and he knelt directly in the mud, clasping his hands and praying desperately. This is the train of hell. His Highness Silas has summoned the train of hell to transport souls. Charles III ignored Bart's loss of composure. He stared dead set at that train. He vaguely saw the figures of several people operating it in the locomotive. This wasn't a monster. This was a machine, a man-made machine. 1 carriage, 2 carriages, 30 carriages. Charles III silently calculated the volume of goods the train was transporting. Finally, he arrived at a conclusion that made him draw a sharp breath. The supplies transported by the steel behemoth in a single trip were equal to the carrying capacity of 5,000 kingdom serfs pulling horse carts for a month. And the speed was astoundingly fast. If this thing isn't used to transport but to transport an army, Charles III's pupils suddenly contracted. The biggest difficulty in mobilizing the Thorn Kingdom's army was rear logistics and marching speed. If he possessed the steel behemoth, he could deploy an army of tens of thousands and sufficient rations to any corner of the kingdom within 3 days. Bart, get up! Charles III grabbed the Minister of Finance from the ground. his eyes flashing with a light intertwined with fanaticism and dread. "This isn't the train of hell. This is endless wealth and power. We must enter the city immediately. I want to see my good nephew with my own eyes." At noon, the silhouette of Blackstone City finally appeared on the horizon. No towering city walls, no moat, no guards holding spears. This completely violated the defensive common sense of a medieval city. But in Charles III's eyes, this city without walls was more indestructible than the kingdom's tallest fortress. Because on the outskirts of the city stood a dense, massive architectural complex. Countless towering chimneys were belching white steam and black smoke into the sky. Giant steel gears turned slowly in open-air factory buildings, emitting a deafening roar. That was Blackstone City's industrial zone. What is this place? Purgatory? Bart covered his ears, dizzy from the massive noise. "No, this is a miracle," Charles III muttered to himself. He saw hundreds, thousands of workers wearing uniform blue work clothes shuttling in an orderly manner among those giant steel buildings like worker ants. Just as they were about to enter the urban area, a squad of people wearing guard uniforms stopped them. These people didn't hold swords or spears, but rather black iron rods with wooden stocks at the front rifles. They stood perfectly straight, their eyes as sharp as eagles, exuding a chilling aura of slaughter that only 100 battle veterans possessed. "Halt, outsiders. Please show your identification and travel documents." The leading public security squad captain looked at them coldly. Charles III took a deep breath, took out a badge forged of pure gold from his coat, engraved with the Thorn royal family's Thornbird totem. "I am Charles Thorn. Go tell your Lord Silas that his uncle has come to see him." Seeing the badge, the squad captain froze for a moment. Then, contrary to Charles III's expectation of him kneeling in fear and trepidation, he frowned and pressed a small black square box walkie-talkie on his shoulder. "Calling the command center. The South City checkpoint has discovered 2 outsiders. One claims to be Charles Thorn, which is the current king. Requesting instructions. Over." A rustling sound came from the walkie-talkie, followed by a lazy young voice. "Uncle Charles? Why did he run to this middle of nowhere? All right, search them. If they don't have any dangerous items, send a car to bring them to the Internal Affairs building." "Copy that." The squad captain put down the walkie-talkie and made a pleased gesture to Charles III. "You two, please cooperate with the search." Charles III's face instantly flushed red. He, a dignified king, actually had to be searched by a few lowly soldiers? And that voice from the walkie-talkie was definitely Silas. That bastard didn't even bother to put on the superficial effort of coming to greet him personally. "Insolent! How dare you search His Majesty?" Bart roared. Click-clack. A neat, uniform sound rang out. Over a dozen rifles were raised instantly, the pitch-black muzzles aimed directly at Charles III and Bart. Although he didn't know what kind of weapon those iron rods were, Charles III instinctively felt a fatal threat of death, as if as long as the other party moved a finger, he would be torn to shreds. "We do things according to the rules. If you don't cooperate, get out of Blackstone City." The squad captain's tone was icy. Charles III gritted his teeth and slowly raised his hands. "Bart, let them search." 10 minutes later, Charles III and Bart sat in a spacious jeep. As the vehicle drove into the main urban area of Blackstone City, Charles III fell into a deep silence once again. If the outer industrial zone was a roaring steel behemoth, then the main urban area was a dream city that transcended eras. The streets were wide enough to accommodate 8 horse carriages side by side, lined with neat street trees. There was no manure all over the ground, no overflowing sewage. It was outrageously clean. The buildings on both sides of the road were mostly 3 or 4 stories high, entirely built of that red brick and cement, inlaid with huge glass windows. The first floors were mostly shops, and through the glass, one could clearly see the dazzling array of goods inside. Brightly colored fabrics, crystal clear glass vessels, and all sorts of unseen mechanical tools. Pedestrians on the street flowed endlessly. The men wore neat jackets or shirts, and the women no longer wrapped themselves in heavy headscarves, but wore brightly colored dresses, walking generously on the street. "Your Majesty, look at those people." Bart leaned against the car window, pointing at a few children by the road. "Are they holding white sugar?" Charles III looked where Bart pointed. Several children were licking snow-white sugar cubes in their hands, laughing carefree. White sugar. In the royal capital, this was a luxury that only grand nobles were willing to take a bite of when they were sick. Here, it was actually a snack for commoner children. The vehicle stopped in front of a massive 6-story building. This building was constructed entirely of grayish-white concrete and a massive amount of glass, reflecting a cold and majestic light under the sun. Several large words hung above the main entrance. "Blackstone City Administrative Center. You two, please get out. The Lord is waiting for you in his top-floor office," the driver said indifferently. Charles III and Bart followed a guide into the building. The floor of the lobby was paved with marble shiny enough to serve as a mirror, and overhead hung a brilliant crystal chandelier. The guide led them to a metal door and pressed a button. The metal doors slid open to both sides, revealing a small space. "This is the elevator, please enter." "What kind of iron cage carriage is this? Bart stubbornly refused to go in. Charles III suppressed his inner unease and strode into the elevator. Seeing this, Bart had no choice but to bite the bullet and follow. As the elevator doors closed, a slight feeling of weightlessness struck, and Bart was so scared he slumped directly onto the floor, wailing loudly. Ding! The elevator doors opened again, having reached the top floor. Charles III adjusted his appearance and walked out of the elevator. At the end of the corridor was an ajar mahogany door. He pushed open the door and was met with an exaggeratedly spacious office. In front of huge floor-to-ceiling windows stood a tall, slender young man wearing a well-tailored gray suit. He held a cup of steaming coffee in his hand, overlooking the entire city. Hearing the sound of the door opening, the young man turned around, revealing a handsome but somewhat cynical face. "Long time no see, Uncle Charles. First time visiting me in 10 years, and you didn't bring any local specialties from the royal capital?" Silas' lips curled into a smile as he casually placed the coffee cup on the massive desk. Charles III stared dead set at this familiar yet unfamiliar nephew. 10 years ago, the cowardly boy who cried his eyes out when he was exiled now exuded an ease of controlling everything. "Silas," Charles III said in a low voice, "you have given me a very big surprise. This city, these strange machines, and your impolite soldiers. What exactly have you been doing behind the kingdom's back?" "Doing what?" Silas walked over to the sofa and sat down, crossing his legs and pointing to the seat opposite him. "Sit. As you can see, I am merely building my fief. After all, 10 years ago, when you threw me into this godforsaken place, you didn't expect me to survive. In order not to starve to death, I had to come up with some ideas myself." "Come up with some ideas?" Bart jumped out from behind Charles III, pointing at Silas' nose and cursing. "This is treason. You privately built these wicked crafts and perverse trickery that violate the gods. You raise a private army, you don't even pay taxes. Silas, you traitor to the kingdom. His Majesty has come today to condemn you." Silas narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at Bart as if looking at a clown. He took a silver metal square windproof lighter out of his pocket. With a clack, the lid popped open, and a cluster of faint blue flame instantly shot out. Bart stepped back twice in fright. "Magic! You really did use magic." Silas lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, exhaled a smoke ring, and then spoke leisurely. "Lord Bart, times have changed. What you call wicked crafts and perverse trickery is called science. As for taxes, Blackstone City hasn't spent a single copper coin from the kingdom in 10 years. On what grounds should I pay taxes?" "You!" Bart was exasperated. "Enough, Bart." Charles III stopped the Minister of Finance. He sat opposite Silas, his gaze burning as he looked at him. "I admit, your Blackstone City has shocked me greatly. That steel behemoth that can run on iron rails, and those flat roads, if they could be promoted throughout the entire kingdom, the Thorn Kingdom would become the most powerful nation on the continent." Charles III paused, his tone becoming majestic. "Silas, hand over the manufacturing methods for these technologies. In consideration of these contributions, I can pardon your past crimes, and even infect you as a Duke of the Kingdom, allowing you to return to the royal capital." In Charles III's eyes, this was a massive grace. An exiled prince being able to return to the center of power was absolutely irresistible. However, Silas suddenly laughed. His laughter grew louder and louder, eventually even laughing tears out. "Uncle Charles, have you stayed in the royal capital so long that your brain has rusted?" Silas snuffed out his cigarette, his eyes instantly turning as sharp as knives. "Pardon me? Infect me as a duke? Do you think I still need your grace? Insolent." Charles III stood up abruptly, releasing the coercion belonging to a king without reservation. "Silas, don't forget, the land beneath your feet is the territory of the Thorn Kingdom. Everything you have is granted by the kingdom. I have 10,000 elite heavy knights. With just one order from me, they can trample your Blackstone City flat." Facing Charles III's threat, Silas didn't even bat an eyelid. He reached out and pressed a button on his desk. "Notify the Guards Battalion. Assemble at Training Ground Number 1 outside the city in 10 minutes. A distinguished guest wants to see some fireworks." Silas stood up, straightened the hem of his suit, and made a pleased gesture to Charles III. "Uncle Charles, since you have so much confidence in your heavy knights, why don't I take you to see my toys? After you've seen them, we can talk again about exactly who is pardoning whom." Outside the city, Training Ground Number 1. This was a massive wasteland enclosed by barbed wire. On the distant hillside, several huge white cross targets were painted. Charles III and Bart stood on the viewing platform of the training ground. The cold wind blew, but it couldn't blow away the clouds of doubt in their hearts. Directly in front of them, 500 Blackstone City soldiers wearing camouflage uniforms were lined up neatly. They had no heavy armor, no shields, no spears. Each person only held a black iron rod with a wooden stock. "This is your army?" Charles III sneered, trying to regain his confidence as a king. "Without armor protection, facing the charge of my heavy knights, they won't even last a single round." "Silas, you are too arrogant." Bart chimed in from the side. "Exactly. A bunch of mud-legged peasants holding fire pokers dare to compare with the kingdom's elite?" Silas stood beside them, holding a pair of binoculars. Hearing this, he merely smiled faintly. Uncle Charles, the prerequisite for a knight's charge is that they can reach my soldiers. He turned to the orderly beside him and nodded. Begin. Item 1, infantry line firing tactic demonstration. Target the wooden board formation 400 meters away. Yes, sir. The orderly waved a red flag. Below, the 500 soldiers quickly spread out, lying prone or half crouching. They leveled the rifles in their hands, taking aim at the distant targets. 400 meters. Charles III frowned. The effective range of the kingdom's most elite longbowmen was no more than 150 meters. At a distance of 400 meters, you couldn't even see a person clearly. What were they going to attack with? Bang, 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 bang. Popping gunfire erupted suddenly, deafening the ears. The muzzles spewed blinding tongues of fire and faint white smoke. Charles III instinctively covered his ears. Immediately after, he saw a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. 400 meters away, those solid with targets 2 inches thick and used to simulate the armor of heavy knights were seemingly struck madly by invisible iron hammers, sending with splinters flying instantly. In just a dozen seconds, hundreds of wooden board targets were riddled with holes and collapsed with a crash. A deathly silence fell over the viewing platform. Bart's mouth was open wide enough to fit an apple, his fat trembling madly. What kind of hidden weapon is this? 400 meters. It can even pierce heavy armor? Charles III's face instantly turned ghastly pale. He was well versed in military affairs, and his mind immediately simulated the scenario of his heavy knights facing this kind of weapon. The knights would initiate a charge on their war horses, but when they were still 400 meters away from the enemy, they would face a ruthless massacre from this terrifying hidden weapon. The steel armor they were so proud of wouldn't be much stronger than paper in front of this weapon. They would all turn into corpses before they could even clearly see the enemy's faces. This is called a bolt-action rifle. Silas' voice sounded by Charles III's ear like a tolling death knell. Range, 800 meters. Effective lethal range, 400 meters. A skilled soldier can fire 15 shots a minute. Charles III swallowed hard and forced himself to say, indeed very strong, but if the knights disperse their charge or use the terrain for cover and take advantage of the interval when you reload your hidden weapons. Reloading interval? Silas laughed, a somewhat cruel laugh. Uncle Charles, you seem to have misunderstood something. Rifles are just individual defense weapons. Next, it'll let you see what a true battlefield meat grinder is. Silas waved his hand again. Item 2, machine gun suppressive fire demonstration. In the positions below, several canvas tarps were lifted, revealing 6 heavy machines with bizarre shapes. They had thick barrels, were mounted on 2 wheels, and had long belts hung with brass-colored bullets connected to their sides. Maxim heavy machine guns, water-cooled. Ready, fire, da-da-da-da-da-da. When those 6 monsters called machine guns roared simultaneously, Charles III felt like the entire world had been torn apart. It wasn't the crisp sound of rifles, but a continuous roar that sounded like the maniacal laughter of the Grim Reaper. The muzzles spat tongues of fire over a meter long, and shell casings flew out from the sides like flowing water, piling into a small mountain on the ground. 6 visible lines of fire intertwined into an airtight net of death, sweeping ruthlessly toward a distant formation of dummies. That was a formation simulating a dense charge. Under the strafing of the machine guns, those dummies were instantly torn to shreds. Dirt was thrown into the air, and trees were snapped in half. Nothing could survive within that net of firepower. Cease fire. The gunfire stopped abruptly. All that remained on the battlefield was the white water vapor rising from the machine gun barrels and the pungent smell of gunpowder smoke. Charles III's legs went soft. He stumbled back 2 steps and slumped heavily into the chair on the viewing platform. His hands gripped the armrests tightly, his knuckles turning white from the excessive force. Despair. Deep despair. 10,000 heavy knights? In front of those monsters called machine guns, let alone 10,000, even 100,000 would just be meat targets offering a few more minutes of target practice. The knightly class, that noble class that had ruled this continent for thousands of years, had been thoroughly sentenced to death in this very moment. Monsters. You've built world-destroying monsters. Bart had completely broken down, kneeling on the ground and kowtowing madly. The gods will punish you. Demon, you are a demon. Silas looked at Bart with disgust. Drag him away, he's too noisy. 2 soldiers came onto the platform and dragged the wailing Bart away like a dead dog. Only Silas and Charles III were left on the viewing platform. Silas walked up to Charles III, looking down from above at this once high and mighty, arrogant king. Uncle Charles, now, do you still feel you can pardon me? Do you still think your 10,000 knights can trample my Blackstone City flat? Charles III raised his head. His originally majestic face now seemed to have aged 10 years. He looked at Silas, his voice hoarse. What exactly do you want to do? Silas, possessing this kind of power, you could absolutely directly conquer the royal capital and seize the throne. Why have you lain dormant here for 10 years? The throne? Silas scoffed, turning to look at the industrial zone spewing thick smoke in the distance. Uncle Charles, your vision is too narrow. The throne of a backward feudal kingdom holds no attraction for me. What I want is for the roar of industry to resound throughout the entire continent. What I want is for steel treads to crush all the rot of the old era. What I want is the sea of stars. Silas turned back, staring burningly at Charles III. I brought you here to see these today not to show off to you, but to give you a choice that will save the Thorn Kingdom from destruction and even allow it to rule the world alongside me. The wind blew across the training ground, carrying the strong scent of gunpowder smoke. Charles III took a deep breath of the pungent smell, trying hard to calm himself from the massive shock. As a monarch, he had enough shrewdness. He knew that since Silas hadn't killed him directly, it meant he still had use value. What choice? Charles III asked in a deep voice. Silas snapped his fingers, and an adjutant nearby immediately handed over a thick document. Silas threw the document onto the table in front of Charles III. The Comprehensive Industrialization Restructuring of the Thorn Kingdom and the Autonomy Treaty of the Blackstone City Special Administrative Region. Charles III read the words on the cover, his brows locked tight. Open it and take a look. Silas sat back in his chair and lit a second cigarette. Charles III opened the document. The more he read, the uglier his face became. Towards the end, he suddenly slammed the document onto the table, laughing out of extreme anger. Silas, you are dreaming. You want me to hand over the kingdom's tariff pricing power, the command of the army, and even abolish the private ownership of noble territories. This isn't just usurpation. You are digging up the roots of the entire kingdom's ruling class. Once this is announced, all the nobles will rebel. Rebel? Silas exhaled a puff of smoke, his eyes contemptuous. Rebel with what? With the scrap metal in their hands? Uncle Charles, you just saw it. In front of machine guns, their nightly charges are a joke. The reason I haven't directly used military force is simply because I don't want to take over a ruined wasteland beaten to a pulp. I need population, I need a labor force, I need an intact market to absorb Blackstone City's industrial capacity. Silas leaned forward, resting his crossed hands on the table, exuding an intense oppressiveness. Sign this treaty, and the Thorn Kingdom is nominally still yours. You are still the king, and you can still enjoy your wealth and glory. But the actual control of the kingdom must be handed over to me. I will use Blackstone City's technology to make the Thorn Kingdom the #1 power on the continent within 5 years. If you don't sign, Silas pointed to the training ground in the distance, then I'll just have to take it myself. When that time comes, the royal capital city walls won't last half an hour against my artillery. Artillery? What is that? Charles III sharply caught this word. Silas smiled. The rifles and machine guns just now were merely appetizers. Since Uncle Charles still has doubts, he'll let you give up completely. Let's go to the artillery position. Half an hour later, the jeep stopped at the foot of a barren mountain. There were no infantry here, only a few massive steel tubes that made people feel terror, pointing diagonally at the sky. Beneath the tubes were complex mechanical structures and huge wheels. 155mm howitzer. Silas patted the freezing gun barrel. Range 20 kilometers. 20 kilometers? Charles III felt his brain had gone numb. 20 kilometers. That was a distance that would take nearly half a day to ride on horseback. This weapon could shoot that far? Target. The abandoned quarry 10 kilometers ahead. Load 1 round, high explosive shell. The artillery commander loudly issued orders. The soldiers skillfully pushed a massive artillery shell weighing dozens of kilograms into the chamber and closed the breech block. Fire. Boom! An indescribably loud explosion erupted, and Charles III felt the entire earth jerk violently. The frenzied shockwave directly flipped him onto the ground. His ears buzzed, and he couldn't hear anything at all. He scrambled up from the ground in terror and looked in the direction Silas was pointing. A dozen seconds later, on the hill where the quarry was located 10 kilometers away, a massive black mushroom cloud mixed with dirt and gravel suddenly rose. Only then did the muffled sound of the explosion faintly travel over. When the smoke and dust cleared, Charles III saw through his binoculars that the originally towering hill had actually been forcibly leveled by a chunk. This is artillery. Silas' voice echoed in Charles III's ears like the whispers of a god. Uncle Charles, how many of these shells do you think the royal capital's proud 10-meter thick granite walls can withstand? The binoculars in Charles III's hands slipped to the ground. He completely broke down. All his pride, all his calculations, turned into laughable bubbles in the face of this absolute, dimension-shattering power. I'll sign. Charles III seemed to be drained of all his strength in an instant, lowering his head dejectedly. A wise choice. Silas snapped his fingers, and the adjutant immediately handed over a fountain pen. With trembling hands, Charles III signed his name on the treaty and stamped it with the king's signet ring. Looking at the treaty, a smile of relief finally appeared on the corners of Silas' mouth. 10 years of forbearance, 10 years of crazy infrastructure building today, it had finally borne abundant fruit. All right, business is concluded. Silas put away the treaty. Uncle Charles, it's a rare visit. They'll take you to see Blackstone City's true foundation. Those things just now were merely tools for killing. But what you are going to see next is the power to change the world. For the next 3 days, Charles III felt as if he were in an absurd yet incredibly real dream. Silas took him to inspect Blackstone City's agricultural zone. There, he didn't see serfs sweating like rain, He only saw machines belching black smoke called tractors roaring across the vast fields, turning up large expanses of fertile soil. Silas told him that after using fertilizer and improved seeds, the wheat yield here reached a staggering 1,000 caddies per moo, more than 10 times that of other parts of the kingdom. Charles III understood that this meant Blackstone City would never have a famine. It meant Silas could easily control the lifeblood of other lords using just grain. Subsequently, they went to a school. In the spacious and bright classrooms, hundreds and thousands of commoner children were learning to read, do math, and even study mysterious knowledge called physics and chemistry. The monopoly of knowledge is the cornerstone of aristocratic rule, Charles III said bitterly, looking at those children. By letting commoners read, aren't you afraid they will have thoughts and rise up to overthrow you? Obscurantist policies only bring stagnation, Silas replied indifferently. What I need are qualified industrial workers, engineers, and scientists, not serfs who only know how to swing a hoe. Only when the wisdom of the entire population is unlocked can civilization leap forward. Finally, Silas took him to Blackstone City's hospital. Outside a severe care ward, Charles III saw with his own eyes a soldier who had been given a death sentence by the accompanying priest due to wound infection and a persistent high fever miraculously break his fever the next day after being injected with a transparent liquid called penicillin, and become lively and active a few days later. A divine medicine that brings the dead back to life. Charles III stared at that small glass bottle with fanatic eyes. With this, the military's casualty rate would suffer a cliff-like drop. Over the course of 3 days, Charles III's worldview was repeatedly crushed and reorganized. He finally understood what a terrifying system the industrialization Silas spoke of was. It covered every aspect of agriculture, industry, education, and medical care. In front of the system, the Thorn Kingdom's traditional feudal system was like a wild man holding a wooden stick facing a fully armed modern army. Your Majesty, just as Charles III was preparing to set off back to the royal capital to implement the restructuring treaty, the Minister of Finance, Bart, who had been locked in solitary confinement for 3 days, suddenly rushed into the reception room, stumbling and crawling. Your Majesty, a disaster has occurred. Bart's face was full of terror, waving a piece of parchment in his hand. Urgent report from the royal capital. Duke Ren has united with 3 marquises from the south and launched a rebellion under the banner of clearing the emperor's side and punishing the rebel Silas. They have amassed a coalition army of 30,000, including 10,000 heavy knights, and are marching toward Blackstone City right now. Charles III's expression changed drastically, and he stood up abruptly. Ren, that bastard, how dare he? Your Majesty, Duke Ren has always coveted the throne. He surely thinks you have been put under house arrest by His Highness Silas and wants to take the opportunity to eliminate both of you. Bart paced anxiously. An army of 30,000. They are less than 50 miles from Blackstone City. Your Majesty, let's run quickly. Charles III instinctively looked at Silas, who was sitting in the main seat drinking tea. Silas put down his teacup. There was not the slightest panic on his face. Instead, a strange smile appeared. 30,000 traditional troops, 10,000 heavy knights? Silas stood up and stretched. Uncle Charles, it seems someone is very dissatisfied with your rule. But this is good too. I was getting a headache over how to deal with those obstinate old nobles. Since they are delivering themselves to our door, it saves me the trouble. Silas, that is an army of 30,000. Charles III grew a bit anxious. Although your artillery and machine guns are powerful, your soldiers only number a few thousand after all. If they close the distance, Silas laughed heartily. Uncle Charles, your understanding of modern warfare is still stuck in the era of cold weapons. Let's go. Today, I will teach you one final lesson and show you what a true dimensional strike is. 30 miles south of Blackstone City, Red River Valley. This was the required path to Blackstone City. At this moment, dust flew in the valley, and horses neighed amid the boiling voices of men. The 30,000-strong coalition army, led by Duke Ren, was marching forward in a mighty contingent. Duke Ren rode a tall, purebred warhorse, wearing magnificent gilded armor, looking exceptionally high-spirited. Lord Duke, ahead is the exit of Red River Valley. Once we pass here, it's a flat wasteland leading straight to Blackstone City, a knight reported. Excellent. Duke Ren sneered. Charles, that fool, actually dared to go to Blackstone City with only a few people. Once I trample Blackstone City flat and chop off Silas' head, it will be time for a change of seats on the throne of the Thorn Kingdom. But my lord, I heard that Blackstone City has some bizarre weapons. Nonsense. Duke Ren cut off his subordinate. What carriages running without horses? What iron rods breathing fire? It's all false rumors spread by country bumpkins. In the face of absolute numbers and my invincible heavy knights, everything is a paper tiger. Entire army, accelerate the march. Tonight, I will hold a victory banquet on the ruins of Blackstone City. The coalition army picked up their pace and surged into Red River Valley. However, what they didn't know was that on the steep cliffs on both sides of Red River Valley, Blackstone City's 1st Infantry Regiment was already waiting in strict formation. Silas and Charles III stood in the command post at the top of the mountain, overlooking the densely packed enemy troops below, looking like ants. They've entered the minefield. Silas checked his watch and said indifferently, "Minefield?" Charles III didn't understand. Silas didn't explain, only issuing an order into his walkie-talkie. detonate. The next second, boom, 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 boom. The entire Red River Valley seemed to instantly transform into an erupting hellish volcano. Hundreds of high-yield landmines planted in advance at the bottom of the valley were detonated simultaneously. The frenzied shockwaves, mixed with countless sharp steel balls and gravel, swept through the vanguard of the coalition army with a force that crushed dry weeds and smashed rotten wood. Men were thrown off their horses, flesh and blood flew everywhere. Duke Ren's proud heavy knights didn't even have time to let out a scream before they and their horses were torn to shreds by modern high explosives. The heavy armor not only failed to protect them, but instead turned into deadly shrapnel, embedding deeply into the bodies of the surrounding soldiers. Enemy attack. There are mages, high-tier mages. Terrified screams erupted from the coalition army. Duke Run was thrown off his horse by the blast wave, dizzy and disoriented. He got up, his face covered in blood, looking at the valley that had instantly turned into an Azura's slaughterhouse, his mind completely blank. Don't panic. Raise your shields. Prepare to charge. Duke Run roared hoarsely, but he quickly realized that he didn't even know where the enemy was. Mortar Company, rapid fire. Machine Gun Company, lock down the valley exit. Do not let a single one escape. At the top of the mountain, Silas' voice was cold without a trace of warmth. Pew pew pew. The shrieks of the Grim Reaper blowing a whistle echoed in the sky. Dozens of mortar shells traced parabolic arcs, landing precisely in the dense crowds of the coalition army. Accompanied by continuous explosions, severed limbs and broken arms flew into the air. Immediately following, the 20 heavy machine guns deployed on both sides of the cliff opened fire simultaneously. The intersecting net of crossfire acted like a massive scythe of death, ruthlessly harvesting the lives at the bottom of the valley. This was a massacre without any suspense. An army of 30,000, without even seeing the faces of the Blackstone City soldiers, collapsed in just half an hour. The soldiers threw away their armor and weapons, crying and screaming as they tried to escape this hell, but the valley exit had long been deadlocked by machine gun fire. Duke Ren knelt in a pool of blood, looking at the mountains of corpses around him. His mind completely broke down. He raised the long sword in his hand, waving it blankly at the sky. Devils, you are all devils. A stray bullet struck him in the chest, ending his laughable ambition. At the top of the mountain, Charles III was freezing all over, as if plunged into an ice cave. Looking at the purgatory-like scene below, his stomach churned violently. He leaned against a rock and vomited madly. 30,000 people, in just half an hour, wiped out entirely. This is the cruelty of industrial-era warfare. Human lives are cheaper than grass in the face of steel and explosives. Silas handed Charles III a handkerchief, his tone calm. Uncle Charles, do you understand now? The curtain call of the old era does not require the consent of the old powers. The wheel of history rolls ever forward. Whoever dares to stand in front of it will be crushed into powder. Charles III wiped the filth from the corner of his mouth. In his eyes as he looked at Silas, besides fear, there was now a trace of profound awe. I understand. Charles III closed his eyes, his voice trembling. Upon returning to the royal capital, I will immediately issue an edict. The Thorn Kingdom will unconditionally cooperate with all of Blackstone City's restructuring. Silas, you've won. The news of the rebellion being suppressed spread throughout the entire Thorn Kingdom like it had grown wings. The 30,000 coalition troops were completely annihilated in Red River Valley, without even seeing the enemy's face. This terrifying battle record thoroughly shattered any thoughts of resistance from the old nobility. When Charles III returned to the royal capital with the restructuring treaty, he met no resistance whatsoever. A vigorous industrialization transformation was comprehensively rolled out across the Thorn Kingdom. Engineers and workers from Blackstone City flooded into every corner of the kingdom like a tide, building railways, constructing factories, opening schools, and promoting fertilizer. In just 3 short years, the Thorn Kingdom underwent earth-shaking changes. The originally muddy dirt roads were replaced by wide cement highways and iron rails. The originally barren farmlands welcomed massive bumper harvests. The originally high and mighty nobles either chose to invest in factories and become capitalists, or went bankrupt in the wave of the era and were reduced to commoners. And Blackstone City had become the absolute core of the entire kingdom, and even the entire continent. 3 years later, in Stormhaven, a coastal city in the eastern part of the Thorn Kingdom, Charles III came here once again. But this time, it was not an incognito inspection. He came as a symbol of the kingdom to attend an unprecedented grand ceremony. The sea breeze howled, and waves crashed against the newly built massive concrete breakwater. Standing on the breakwater were officials, merchants, and foreign envoys from all over the kingdom. Everyone's gaze was fixed dead set on the deepwater port in the distance. Anchored, there was a giant steel warship that looked like a mountain. It had no sails, and its entire body was covered in thick gray armor. Huge chimneys belched black smoke, and terrifyingly large-caliber main guns were mounted on the bow and stern. What was most unbelievable was that the giant ship's deck was flat and wide, neatly parked with over a dozen strangely shaped Iron Bird's early propeller fighter aircraft. Your Majesty, is that the ultimate weapon Lord Silas spent 3 years building? Bart stood beside Charles III. Although he had grown accustomed to Blackstone City's miracles, seeing this giant ship still made his legs go soft involuntarily. Charles III took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, that is the aircraft carrier Blackstone. Silas told me that with it, our power will no longer be confined to land. This sea, and even the continents across the sea, will all all submit at the feet of the Thorn Kingdom. Just then, a steam whistle that shook the heavens sounded from the giant ship. Woo! Accompanied by the whistle, the giant ship slowly sailed out of the port. Immediately after, several iron birds on the deck let out deafening roars, accelerating over an extremely short distance and violently shooting into the clouds. Watching the fighter jets circling in the sky, watching the invincible fleet slicing through the waves on the sea, cheers like a tsunami erupted from the crowd. Charles III turned his head and looked at Silas, who stood not far away in a crisp, sharp Navy Marshal uniform. Silas seemed to sense this, turned his head, and gave Charles III a faint smile. At that moment, all the indignation and humiliation in Charles III's heart vanished like smoke. He knew that although he had lost absolute power, he had witnessed the rise of a great empire, witnessed a miracle that spanned a millennium. Silas, Charles III muttered silently in his heart, "You are not just 1,000 years ahead of this era. You are the god of this era." The sea breeze fluttered the lapels of Silas' uniform. He raised his head, his gaze crossing the vast ocean, looking toward an even further distance. There, a broader world awaited conquest by the treads of the industrial behemoth. The era belonging to Blackstone City had only just begun. The end